Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another video. In this video, I will be discussing psychoanalysis into the book known as The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu. Now, in my understanding of this particular book, which I've read about 2 times now, the first time I read it, I started picking up on certain signs that indicated of a particular leftist ideology. But then I began to understand that the true nature upon reading The Art of War is it is an actual manual that if one, as a leader of a nation, were to follow, you would actually begin to understand how to instill leftist ideology or communism within your nation. And in understanding that, I rose up upon this page, which in the laying plans, which I may now cover, the 5 initial portions or tactics of plans in order to instill communism. Here are the 5 factors. The art of war is governed by 5 constant factors to be taken into account in one's deliberations when seeking to determine the conditions obtaining in the field. These are the moral law, the understanding of heaven, the understanding of earth, the power of the commander in place, and the method and discipline at which you apply the previous 4 factors. And when you utilize these and we then enter the portion where now we arrive at the waging war, which means the conquering of the wanting to instill these particular values. In the second stance of waging war, and you enter the third now, it states specifically at the third, again, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. Which means as you enter leftist ideology, the moment you create a greater strain upon your economic state than your nation is able to withstand, then you enter a deficit, which means you begin entering the instilling of the communist rule at that particular point, according to who is conquering you. Now, when your weapons are dulled, your ardor damped, your strength exhausted, and your treasure spent, other chieftains will spring up to take advantage of your extremity. Then no man, however wise, will be able to avert the consequences that must ensue. The more you begin to understand the art of war, the more you realize it is actually a tactical plan written by a war general in order to instill communist or leftist ideology in the nations we were going to fight. In the art of war itself, one understands that war is an act of a neurotic self. an individual that deals with jealousy would want to wage war, because they would be jealous of what others have acquired for themselves. And so when you look now into the divide of from narcissist to neurotic, a narcissist seeks to control, goes around to control the circumstance at which they can control their experience or rate of pain. They receive pain from the world. Whereas a neurotic, a jealous self, feels that they should be in control, and rather than learning how to create the control, they simply rid of the control. And in that particular notion, we see the rise of communism, where we, in today's society, in Western civilization, Europe, Africa, Asia, we actively see leftist ideology take place in many different places in the world. But in different parts, you see it manifested to different extremes. Because in essence, according to Marxist idea or ideology, and the idea of Marxism is a poorly written plan regarding communism, because in essence, the idea of communism is that everybody should have equal opportunity and nobody should have to work. Which both in itself are a paradox. They don't work that way. You cannot make a system based on those particular values. So now when you look at a place like communist China, the only place where communism truly works as a society is because they have absolute, complete control over every little aspect of your life. And the less you are a good worker, the more they impact your social score, the less freedoms you can obtain for yourself, and the less you will then be given a chance at the same equality. And that all stems at control, which, as you can see in The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu, the man himself, which, with absolutely zero disrespect to the Chinese culture, I value a lot of great teachings out of the Shaolin arts, which has been influenced by Buddhist influence from India, and in the understanding of the Dalai Lama of Tibet, which even China does not want to recognize Tibet as a region of China, because once again, in the understanding of leftist ideology, if you wish to instill it, you rid the nation of its moral law. God, a higher power. The moment you rid a nation of that particular self, we then see the faith of people be removed in return, and then the next following 4 steps can be achieved more easily. And so now, as an individual with living in Canada, which you've just seen, the Holy Bible has been made illegal in certain contexts. But if it's made illegal in certain contexts and not others, eventually it's going to be illegal in all contexts. And surely enough, we will then see the deletion or the complete delete of our faith system in Canada, where they can then implement a new system, which in the next step, as written, would be to change our understanding of heaven. And the moment you change the understanding of heaven, in the idea that it does not exist, the entire Communist Manifesto to take over control of a nation is essentially the opposite of the experience of faith. It follows the same structure, but it is meant to view it in a dehumanizing way, to be ruled by a higher power in the Communist Manifesto. And so now when you look further into the analysis of the death of God that was discussed by Nietzsche, the death of God is in essence a wrap of a thesis which Nietzsche was making regarding leftist ideology. In order for leftist ideology to work, you must essentially kill God in order to make the left work. Because if you don't kill God, you can't be dehumanizing. And the idea is, if you are not dehumanizing, leftist ideology does not work. At the fundamental value, conservatives hate ideas, and liberals hate people. And you might not believe me on that one, but I might hate your idea. Doesn't mean I'm going to hurt you as a person. But just because I hate you as a person, doesn't mean I'm going to hurt your idea. And we see a divide in political violence. But now we've also seen that just for every political violence seen against the right, we see the same political violence happening to the left in a less widely, broadly viewed events. But imagine now if we control every media news source as liberal biased news. Eventually you would begin to see the perspective of your belief system in your approach, that which you see your opinions on matters based around the liberal biased and based news systems that which cover the news. Because they will actively be telling you this is what liberals think. But they don't tell you what conservatives think should be done. They only tell you what liberals think should be done. And so you only learn to think as a liberal. The moment you learn conservatism, you realize that it is in itself a opposite of communism. In exchange for the return of God, not only are you granted more freedoms, less taxes, more ability to save, because upon saving, the idea is to utilize the two systems together. The previous psychoanalysis of societal systems and societal structures was meant to implicate a strength in that system. It was not meant to implicate that that is the only system that works. You need to implement them together in polar opposites, because if I don't know what love is, How do I know what hate is? And if I don't know what freedom is, how do I know what social programs is? It's a different system meant to pull you away from society again. But in this system of social programs is also another beauty. You see, you can't look at it entirely from one entire perspective, which now, as you see, as I'm speaking this video, you might see me cover it from a more conservative perspective, which is challenging your viewpoints as a liberal listening. Because I'm actively sharing with you that there are certain good factors about being a conservative. But just as any business societal structure, there's always a buyout, which means there is a price in exchange for the service. And the price is, well, your moral compass. Somehow, in a sick and twisted way, the human psyche decided that, oh, well, if you want more freedoms, we're also going to take some freedoms away. And that if you want to make more money, we're also going to increase the job creation rate, which in the lowering of tax rate. And then you see, back to the first statement. Whoa, 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 whoa. You mean we're taking rights away so you can have more freedoms? What do you mean about that? And then you dive into, all of a sudden, the left saying, empower minorities. And based on the idea of empowering minorities, which means a much smaller percentage of the population, based on the idea of empowering minorities, we went into, screw the majority, let's make the small guy win for once. But in making the small guy win for once, well, guess what? We see the rise of the loser mentality that we can also call communism. But it also has its beauty, because in the conservatism, you might be a winner for all you care, but guess what? You don't see the people you hurt in the other end. And so you see a back and forth. They created a dilemma, a moral dilemma in both parties. Because if you're voting for one, you were seen as evil by the other. And if you were seen as evil by the other, you were voting for one. And now it created a complete divide where we, as people, no longer agree on any particular singular value. Because if we only cover the truth or events of the world from one particular bias-based media coverage, eventually you begin to think like what you hear. And then you wonder why all these damn Taylor Swift songs are turning our daughters into billionaire hating women that preach hatred towards billionaires. Meanwhile, they listen to the only billionaire artist in the entire world. The paradox, because in that exact same idea is also the idea of the red pill minded man, where the man believes he knows in the ultimate truth. Everything is a matter of perspective. And in my hopes of discussing these particular topics with you, all I am simply offering to invite you into is for you to learn as an individual. You are not bound to one particular way of thinking. You may individually create your own opinions and reasonings, and you should not be made to feel like you have to walk on eggshells in order to be able to speak your opinions out of fear that somebody's just going to walk up to you and go bang. This is a sickness, and we have to revert that immediately the moment we learn to reanalyze and recenter, and not just the right or left, but in utilizing both systems together so that we can keep everybody happy. But it's going to take cycles. And in those cycles, we can actively create a drastic change in society where we can see not just people, not just businesses, but actual nations and countries pull out of debt. Which in a previous video I speak and talk about the essential root of where money goes in the bank. Which if a true economy was circulating its money of its own bank back into its own economy, it would technically not be in debt because it would have a wealth backed by physical value. Which now, if I may identify the next point in the communist takeover, therefore, at 12 in laying plans, therefore in your deliberations, when seeking to determine the military conditions, let them be made the basis of a comparison in this wise. And then it lists questions of things you should consider when improvising your deliberations, when wanting to instill communism. So let's read some of these things. At the 13th letter of the first laying plan section, which at 13 is the head of the questions, the psychological analysis of the mind the rulers should analyze in their psyche. These are the questions you should ask yourself when you want to approach instilling these values into your own country. Here are the questions. Which of the two sovereigns is imbued with the moral law? Which of the two generals has most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth? On which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Which army is stronger? On which side are officers and men more highly trained? In which army is there the greater constancy, both in reward and punishment? Now it states at number 14, after these 7 questions, these 7 points of analysis. At number 14 of the laying plans portion on page, once again, number 7. By the means of those 7 considerations, I can forecast victory or defeat. Which means now it is up to the individual's ability to create a plan. And unfortunately in Canada, I hate to say it, but the Liberal government although they have been in power now for almost, 10 years? We are seeing their limitations because they are being led by people that believe in the idea that in order to win, it is the losers that win and not the winners that cause the wins. And the idea that if you make someone that is lesser than you cause you to win, that is not an act of empowerment to the person. That is an act of empowerment to you as the egotistical leader, seeking to empower your own self at that particular point by creating a false hope in the people, by making them believe you are generating better things than the worst that you are actively doing. In Canadian politics, just as a young nation, which is still technically sovereign by Britain, England, which is where the Bank of Canada owes its debts to. And England itself owes its debts to China. And then you see then where the money goes, which I would recommend reading this book if you happen to have a chance. Anyways, thank you for watching the video that I cover on my psychological analysis on the book written by Sun Tzu, known as The Art of War. Thank you.